Hello, everybody. Good morning from Seattle. Welcome, Bala.
Thank you. Thank you again. It's a good
Yeah,
thing that we like talking to each other. Otherwise,
true, true indeed. Yeah. So I think uh, last week, right? And so for those who may be joining us live now for this session, we hold this session every Tuesdays at 11. It's a session where we all talk about things related to go-to-market planning, and we love to sort of engage with people who are passionate about it. At the bottom of the screen, anybody can ask questions. So if there are questions for you, anybody has, please shoot those, as well as on the side there's a chat window. So if you want to chat, but please feel free to engage in a conversation. This is a community being built online for all of us together. And so last week, Bala, when we were talking about it, right, we talked about the entire plan to execution loop, what it takes for closing the planning to execution loop. And one of the things that stuck to me was you mentioned that generally the sales operations teams are drinking from a fire hose, right? They're always being reactive, right? And they're being reactive to what is the clear and present danger at that point of time, right? And we've seen that in our discussion, right? When we talk to people, we talk to them about stuff holistically, and they'll say, "Yeah, no, all that sounds good, but really, right now, I have this problem. I need to solve this problem." And it's interesting to see how they think about these problems in silos and not seeing the connections. So I was thinking that'll be good for us to sort of really talk about how should people think about building an end-to-end framework for sales operations, right? And so I thought this will be a great topic, and of course this will be probably will become the start of getting into the details of every aspect of that. So let's get on with it, right?
yeah.
So a little bit of a background for people who are new over here, right? Like I said, join us every Tuesday. You want to talk to like-minded people, please join us. A little bit about Fullcast. We have a platform that essentially is focused on closing out the plan to execution loop and really shortening it to make it agile with people. So let's start with the capability model, because you and I have discussed this notion of capability model, right? And why is it important? So do you want to share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think last week we kind of talked about, as you pointed out in your introduction, right? When we approach these things in a siloed manner, or when we approach them in a way that you're sort of solving for point problems, as you said, clear and present danger, the next thing, the hottest thing on your email inbox for the day or whatever, right? You tend to miss out on thinking about this problem holistically. And I think we mentioned that last week, but we kind of left it hanging in terms of, okay, what does that mean? How do I think about it holistically? What is a good sort of reference model that I can use to think about sales operations as a whole? And that's kind of where the capability model comes in. I'm sure most people are familiar with capability models and also capability maturity models, which a few of those we covered today. But the idea is for this session to really focus on what is the reference model that I can look at, right, and see, okay, how am I doing in relation to the capabilities that I should have, the things that I should be thinking about holistically, and how do I assess myself or my organization against that reference model, right, against that end state view. And that's really what we hope to.
So, but I want to sort of pause you there, and really, I want us to define what a capability model is,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
And why is it the advantage in terms of thinking about capability model? It's the analogy that I have in my mind, right? Is people, when you're building software, right? Are we thinking features? Are we thinking functionality, right? So are we looking at a point solution? Are we thinking, so like when I walked into Salesforce, right? We were building this entire capability model for all things that need to happen across our team, right? So why did we take that approach?
Yeah, I think the advantage of one, what is a capability model? The capability model is a list of or a structure or a framework of capabilities, meaning abilities that you as an organization are going to need in order to be successful, right? So if we were to list an ideal list of capabilities that a sales operations, revenue operations team would have, what would those things be? What are the areas that they need to be responsible for? What are the areas, or what are the capabilities or abilities that that organization should have? And really then coming to a point of assessing how good are you with those abilities, right? So that's really what the capability model is there to do. Now the assessment is obviously something that there is some framework around how to think about assessing yourself against an ability, right? Sometimes it's speed, sometimes it's agility, sometimes it's flexibility, right? So there are various sort of dimensions to how to assess that ability. But the idea is that let's start with the holistic view of it. I think so one of the things that we established last week is that all of these things are sort of interconnected with each other, right? So when you execute on a particular ability, that's going to impact something else, and so you have to have the thought process around how each of these capabilities impacts other abilities of your sales organization as well as your operations team, more in a micro sense, but in a broader sense, looking at the entire sales organization, right? So that's what we would look to cover today.
Yeah, and I think my guidance on this is always is that you got to look at all things as being mutually exclusive but collectively exhaustive, right? If we look at the entire functions, right, and that's probably a good lens for us to sort of look at it. So so these are some of the core pillars of the capability model for a sales organization that we have, right? As we've always thought in terms of design, rhythm, motion, and enablement, and we've taken that thing. And so, do you want to sort of shed some light on this thinking that we
so
had?
I think broadly, if we were to take all of the abilities that a sales operations team needs to have, right, we would sort of break them down into these sort of 4 buckets, right, from a revenue ops or sales ops perspective, and those buckets are just groupings of abilities that you need to have in an organization. So clearly, planning and building a plan and being able to put together a go-to-market plan is one set of capabilities that you would have. Tracking your performance to that plan, right? Whether that be performance measurement of your sales cycles, the efficiency of your sales cycles, your efficiency of your sales motion in terms of how much effort is it to get to revenue, and you're constantly looking at how to reduce the effort to revenue in a sense, right? How much effort is being put to gain $1 in revenue. So it encompasses those kinds of capabilities that an ops team needs to have. The other one is sort of the day-to-day operational aspects of keeping your execution environment sort of aligned to the plan. And what this means is all the moves, changes that occur, territories, reorganizations, readjustments, recarving of territories, people changing roles, new people coming into the business, people getting promoted, like all of these things that you do in managing a sales team that has an impact on plan. And so the idea is that you're trying to keep all of those things in line with what you have laid out in terms of the execution plan for go-to-market, right? And the last bit is enablement. What we call enablement is really focused on training, productivity, right? How do you get people ramping up fast and knowing what to do in this complex sort of both systems as well as the sales motion itself, or the revenue motion itself, right? So how do you get people trained? How do you give them the right content at the right time in their job roles? Where do they find the process documents? Where do they find the collateral that they need to do their jobs? That's really the enablement infrastructure helping the sales teams and the revenue teams really achieve their maximum potential, right? So we sort of look at a broader sales operations, revenue operations team, and these are sort of four big buckets of capabilities that I think that each of the organizations need to have.
So when you said that each of the organizations need to have, are we talking about, so like typically what we've seen is, sales strategy in an organization is focused on the go-to-market planning side of the house. And then the tracking to performance, alignment to plan, all that stuff kind of sits all over the place, right? Actually, in an organization. And enablement is always seen as, this front end team that's doing just, the boot camps and doing scores and those kind of things.
Yeah.
But they don't seem to sort of be thought of as an integrated organism, so to say, right? So, how is that a trend? Is that I mean, why do we have those distinct functions?
So I think it's ultimately there are two factors that kind of drive this. One is the size of the organization, so scale is one factor, and the other factor is the skill set that's required, right? So if you look at the broad buckets that we have here, the skill sets needed for strategy is different than the skill set needed for operational considerations, right? And is a different skill set than enablement. And so what tends to happen is as organizations scale, these functions tend to sort of break off into sub-teams within the RevOps teams to kind of deal with that specialized topic. So we have, and you also start to see from a systems perspective that naturally there are components that fall into each of these teams. But the trick, as we said, is that they're all interconnected, which means that if you don't make sure that your revenue team understands what the strategy is, then you're going to break down when you're executing. So even though they're all related, which is one of the important concepts that we will keep reiterating, these are specialized skills, right? So as the organization gets bigger, you're going to see multiple people take on different, or even teams take on different pillars and drive that, right?
I think for that very, and I think for that very reason, right, thinking of it from a capability lens end to end is super important, because as organizations grow larger, even the reporting structures change, right? Sometimes you have sales strategy reporting into the strategy team, and they're kind of working on their own. The operations team could be reporting into IT, could be reporting to sales, and enablement, generally is reporting to sales, but that the operations team has three options, right? IT, finance, sales, and because the organizational dynamics kind of move in different directions, we sometimes miss, seeing all the trees in the forest.
That's right. So I think as you mentioned, since these teams kind of grow organically into these separate sort of silos, then the organization structures and the reporting structures don't necessarily help in aligning them to think about revenue operations as this holistic problem, right? But I think more and more, when you get to the idea of a revenue operations team or a chief revenue officer that's in charge of all of your revenue motions, it's sort of, we're starting to see all of those things come together under a common leadership, around revenue ops. So I think that's a good thing in terms of sort of aligning these various functions that may have sort of grown apart to come back together, so you can think about this problem holistically. Because I remember even in my past experience, or even talking to a lot of customers, the challenge is that sometimes operationally there are a lot of practical decisions made in the field. Like, for instance, a manager may agree to, pass date a particular engagement with an employee, with a sales rep, right? And that information doesn't get communicated back into the plan. That information doesn't get communicated into the sales ops teams, and so there's discrepancies in commissions that are issued, and so all these kinds of breakdowns are likely to happen if you don't have that common thinking process around looking at this holistically. So as organizations scale, we've also found the majority of the problems to be in the fact that these things sort of break off into their own buckets, if you will.
Yeah. So walk us through this model. It's a lot of colors.
A lot of colors.
Reminds you of the Monopoly board that we used to have.
Yeah. We'll talk about the colors in a second. But one thought that we had was, okay, this is a fairly boring subject, and so how do we make it exciting? So we put it into the popular board game, and I think the four corners are kind of ironic in the sense that if you you want to get off to a good start at the beginning of the year, so good go, and really that all depends on your planning abilities, right? Planning capabilities. So we cover a number of different topic areas there as it relates to planning. And all of these, as we talked about last week, needs to be integrated, needs to be a common plan across, whether you're thinking about your business unit, your product teams, go-to-market goals, your sales teams, go-to-market goals, your channel go-to-market goals. How do these things align to kind of match up to your company goal, and how do you put that together? So all of these things have to sort of interconnect with each other. But the idea of this integrated planning is that you get a go-to-market plan that you can get the teams off to at the beginning of the year in a transparent, so everybody knows what the plan is, and two, in a way that it can be deployed into the day-to-day systems that the salespeople or customer success people are using, right? Now, if you don't do this right, you end up in jail. That's kind of as a sales ops jail, right? This is a sales strategy jail because
we call it sales ops hell. You get caught up in sales ops hell.
That's right. So when you get off to this start and you have a bad plan, well, you're going to find out very quickly as soon as you release the plan to your revenue teams. They're going to be coming at you, going, "Hey, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense." All the way down to sort of practical issues like, "Hey, this account is no longer here, or this account was bought by this company, so this should be my account. No, the industry on this account is incorrect because they do this." There's all kinds of stuff that come at you, when you deploy a plan, because everyone's getting in there and taking their first look at what it is that you have come up with, and so being responsive to that is important as a sales organization, and your ability to sort of adjust, change, and make sure you can address those immediate problems out of the gate is also a key capability, right? And I remember we used to specifically staff up for the first initial 3 months after the new plan goes live, because there's usually all kinds of stuff that come at it, and you cannot avoid it, right? I mean, it's everything to do with the data quality, to everything to do with your plan that people aren't happy with, to the transparency of the models that are used. So all these things sort of come at you, and that's important. And then I think the next step in the process is figuring out how you're going to measure when all the things that you've done are working well or not working well. And you want to sort of build a very tight feedback loop to be constantly comparing against, okay, what did we say we were going to do? And a simple thing is one of the biggest reasons why sales teams don't meet their sales goals is they don't hire in time. Right? You wouldn't think that would be the problem. Usually, a lot of people are quick to blame it on the salespeople and say, "Hey, they don't know what they're selling," or blah blah blah, or they're not working hard, or they're all lazy, or whatever. But usually, the biggest factor that influences whether you are going to meet your number or not is whether you are hiring in time to put people in roles that can be productive, right? And I think that is the number one thing that you would start to look at when you put the new goal in place is, hey, you say you're going to hire 10 reps in the first quarter. Did we do that, right? And if we don't do that, then there is a knock-on effect in the subsequent quarters in our ability to meet the number, right? Or the assumptions that you made in plant, like your ramp assumptions that you put in and all that kind of stuff, are they holding up? You may have put in certain deal size assumptions and certain churn assumptions and things like that may or may not be holding. And if they're not holding, then what does that mean to the plan? What does that mean to our ability to make the number? So that feedback loop establishing that upfront and doing that in a consistent way year after year, right? That is the most important thing, right? And so otherwise what happens, and this I've seen this very often across revenue teams, is that they would look at the plan at the beginning of the quarter, and then they get buried in day-to-day operational problems. And then a QBR comes along and the sales manager says, hey, come on, show me how we're doing against plan. And then somebody has to go run off and look at all the metrics and all the stuff. And it's this like a week-long process of pulling data and massaging it. Well, that's not very productive. And two, it also doesn't give you a tighter feedback loop, right? So establishing the capability to be able to measure your plan quickly, that I think is one of the key things. And then the other point also is when we get to enablement, you'll see that it's not just about hiring people; it's also making them productive, right? It's making them get off off to the races quicker, right? And so we'll see that as we come along. But being able to measure performance is a key aspect of making a plan go live, right? And be able to know that you're succeeding. And the third aspect of this is your moves at changes, or what we call them moves at changes, but it's literally all the things that impact the sales organization at runtime, right? Things that you plan for, things that you don't plan for, reorganizations, recarving. You figure out that a particular experiment that you worked on is not working. So those are changes that you want to make to your plan to sort of make sure that you stay on target for the business goals that you have established, right? So having the ability to respond to those changes, we think, is an integral part of making sure that you have an agile sales revenue operations team. And so that's covered in the third, on the third side of the square there. And the last bit is enablement, right? Enablement really focuses on, as I said, getting people productive, making sure that they're ramped up quickly, and making sure that they have the tools at their disposal so that they're not wasting a lot of time looking for materials or searching for things. You would set up things like deal desk and RFP teams and things like that speed up the process, speed up the sales motion, so that people are not wasting time trying to wrangle resources internally. You want to make sure that those resources are given to them at the opportune time, so that they can be focused on the selling process and the revenue generation process, rather than searching for a case study or searching for things like that, right? So that's one important aspect of it. Training people on the process and on the go-to-market model and on the strategy, that's also another key aspect of enablement, right? So when you deploy a plan, I think that transparency of that plan in terms of what everybody is going after, which hill are we going to go take, that is super important to make sure that that's communicated to the rest of the organization. So the enablement function is the one that sort of does that. And the capabilities there are an important aspect of making sure the resources are being productive, right? So these are the four pillars, as we talked about earlier. Sometimes these things are run by different organizations within the revenue ops team. Sometimes they report up into different hierarchies in the sales versus finance versus sales ops, kind of reporting structure. But ultimately, these are what we believe are the four big buckets of capabilities that are important to make sure you have a successful revenue ops team.
So one thing that strikes me is on our board out here, we put forecast, pipeline management, and even some of like say the win-loss analysis, right, as part of enablement.
Yeah.
Right. But we've seen a lot of times, right, the sales operations team that is driving the pipeline analysis, right? So like, is there a hard line, or is it a best practice?
No, so the way I would think about it is, again, as I said, all of these are interconnected, which means that you can't really have an effective enablement plan if you can't measure performance, if you can't measure where things are working. And so it's not sort of independent things, it's very interconnected. So in organizations where you have a person in charge of enablement and a person in charge of ops, these two folks would have to work very closely with each other to measure how the sales reps or the customer success reps are doing in terms of that motion, the efficiency of that motion, where things are working, where things are failing, which kind of deals are we winning, which kind of deals are we losing, which competitors are we winning against, which competitors are we consistently losing against. So that becomes a self-improvement plan, if you will, in terms of enablement, to be constantly looking at metrics that are supported by the set of capabilities opposite to that, but really kind of driving the behavior of the sales organization and the micro changes, if you will, to the sales motion to sort of be successful in what feedback you're getting from the market, right? And so that's why the win-loss analysis, pipeline forecasting, these are things that you gotta pay attention to and train the sales and revenue teams on, to have a focus on, right? And how to do it better. How much time should I spend prospecting versus working on late stage deals, right?
Yeah.
That's an important aspect of the strategy, but it's also a very important aspect of managing the behavior of the sales people, right? And having the managers be the front line.
That's so accurate, because I think what we've seen is people resort to industry benchmarks without actually taking a hard look at their own data.
Yeah.
And I think we are all unique in that sense, right? Our data is what it is. The benchmark is what it is. And benchmark doesn't really tell you the median from the averages. And so, right, you got to be looking at all those things. And win-loss analysis is really important, because I think most companies end up doing a loss analysis, but not a win analysis. Right. And that directly contributes to what happens in enablement and what's done in boot camps and sales collateral.
That's right. I mean, so the whole mantra of sales enablement is do what you're doing good, do more of it, right? And do less of what you're not doing well at, right? And so being able to understand that from measurements, and typically you would work with the team to establish the key set of KPIs you're looking for in that context, and then driving the training, the kind of enablement of the organization to follow.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, and this is not tied to the capability lens, but where do you think companies and organizations have an opportunity to automate versus you really need human intelligence, right? Because there's a lot of this AI buzz that goes around. Okay, I can get AI benchmarks and all, but sales, as you know it, right, has is a huge human component. Because remember the game that we used to have at Salesforce, right? Pipeline reviews, big deal pipelines, over $1 million. Guess what? I mean, everybody had the deal stuck at $900K to game the system.
Yeah.
What are the aspects that you think we can be good candidates for automation versus where we really need people digging in deep into data?
Yeah, I think when you look at automation, what we have to look at is the agility that's needed by the operations team, right? If it is a particular ability that doesn't require agility, then you probably wouldn't spend too much time automating it, right? So as an organization scales, really the lens that you're looking for is how can I be agile? How can I be responsive to what the market conditions look like, or what the practical conditions of running a sales teams look like? I think that's the lens to look at from an investment standpoint, right? Really, you want to drive towards agility. And I believe that for each of the buckets that we have listed in here, there is possible automation to make you more agile, right? And that should be the angle to look at. The counter argument to that, the flip side of the coin, is that if you automate this thing point solution by point solution, meaning one problem at a time, if you try to tackle this in a silo, what you end up with is a whole bunch of tools that don't work with each other, which is counterproductive to being agile.
Yeah.
Right? Because every time you need to make a change, now we have 50 tools that you have to go in and make changes. So it's important to think about it that way. Like automation, purely from an automation perspective, is is not going to drive a lot of ROI for you in terms of the capability. But I think what you have to look at is, so what are the areas that I need agility? Where do I need that agility? How do I invest in it? But when I'm investing in it, I have to look at the problem holistically. So I'm not point solutioning it, because point solutioning it will kill you in terms of agility, right? The more tools you have to manage. Like, I remember talking to one of our prospects, and they said, well, we are currently going through a 3-month process to change a field in Salesforce, because we have this reporting solution that depends on it. We have this solution that depends on it. And to make updates to all these systems to take on a new field now means that it takes about 3 months for IT to go and configure all this. So what was a simple request all of a sudden just snowballs into this massive IT effort, and that's what fuels agility, right? That's kind of
that's the case of tail wagging the dog, or field.
Well, I think what I've noticed with sales operations is that nobody likes the CRM. If the CRM is a burden to sales guys, right? They're going to shove some data in there for you. It's not going to be useful for you for whatever reason, but the reality is not going to be in your CRM. People are going to keep separate spreadsheets, and they're going to manage their business. They're not going to stop making money just because IT hasn't given you the changes that you need. What they're going to do is they're going to find alternatives. When they find alternatives, what happens? The data in your CRM is bad. And when you use that for planning, you make bad decisions, right? So it's important to make sure that cycle works. And if you're not agile enough, what happens is people will go outside of all the areas where you're collecting data to make decisions, and they'll drive their own business. So you remember, these are people's livelihood at risk. They're not going to wait for IT team to make money to feed my family. So they're going to focus on what they can do to get the job done, right? And so I think that is the risk that you run of an organization that's not agile, is that people are going to go outside the system to do what they need to do. And the reality of your sales organization is not in your systems. And what you have is basically, as you said, all the deals stuck at $999,000 because 1 million triggers a big deal review, right? So they get away from it. So I think that's the key, right? When the sales teams don't see the ops teams as a competitive advantage to them, and if they see that as a stumbling block to get to what they need, they're going to simply go around you, right? And that doesn't help anybody at the end of the day.
Yeah. So one of the things that we wanted to do is, there's a bunch of things that we talked about in the previous slide as capabilities, and every organization is different. Yeah. Right. So it's not that you can take this entire thing and say, I'm going to use it, and I'll do everything, because you really can't do everything. Right. So now the question that comes up, prioritization. Right. How do you prioritize which capabilities to go work on, and which capabilities you're okay deprecating, right, or not investing heavily? So you want to just walk us through this framework of how we think of these things?
Yeah, I think it's again, as with most capability models, right? It's a maturity process, right? And so you cannot automate something that you cannot repeat, right? And so if there is in your process or in your decision making or your way in which you're doing something is chaotic, it's ad hoc, it's not repeatable, you haven't established a repeatable process for it, you haven't established a repeatable approach or strategy around it, you can't automate it, right? Yeah. And so it's important that before you get to the point of, okay, I'm going to go automate something, that you think through what is the way in which we can systematize this, what is the way in which we can repeat something over and over again, right? Then comes the aspect of understanding the impact of that on your organization, right? So for instance, if you have a task that doesn't take a lot of time for somebody to do, but you have a lot of those activities that you're doing all the time, which in aggregate is keeping you away from high value work, right? And so these may be simple things like, okay, I got to go and stamp a holdout on an opportunity because this person's leaving, or I have to go adjust the quota here, I have to do this or that or the other thing. Like, if these things slowly sort of add up, and you look at your organization and you go, well, where would I like to focus my energy on versus what am I spending most of my time in, right? Yeah. And that's going to give you a good sense of what are the opportunities for automation? What are the things that I can systematize? And more often than not, everybody's starting from a blank sheet of paper, and I think there is a lot of commonality in a lot of these tasks, right? And one of the key things that we learned in sales operations through many years is that there are two aspects to any sort of repeatable task that a sales ops team is doing. One is the workflow itself, right? Which is the actual, do this first, do this next, do this after that sort of workflow. And then there is a whole series of things that feed into that workflow based on your go-to-market strategy. What I mean by that is the workflow around issuing a holdout is fairly the same. But what amount you apply to the holdout or how many days you apply to the holdout may be based on your go-to-market model, maybe based on the industry, maybe based on some aspect of your go-to-market model. Routing a particular lead to somebody, the workflow is the same. But who you route it to, what process you use that to route it to, all of that will depend on your go-to-market model, right? So there is this sort of separation. And what tends to happen is when you think about automation, you clump these two together and you write some Apex code that contains all of this, both the go-to-market aspects, parameters, if you will, and the actual workflow kind of munged in together into one piece of code that you deploy, which means every time you change your go-to-market model, you got to go and rewrite and retouch code, right? And so the separation between the parameters that come from your go-to-market model and the actual automation needs to be made, right? And so when we think about automation, I think that's also one of the other key lenses to look at is, can we repeat the workflow as many times as we want, but the go-to-market model may change or may vary based on what our strategy is this year versus next year and so on, right? And how do you implement it to scale that, right?
Yeah. And then the other part, right? We bring on all these capabilities, and so you got to say, am I effective at it? Because I'm going to automate it. Are we effective at this?
Right.
And is it necessary? If it's necessary, but we're not effective, that candidate wins, right? But if it is effective but not necessary among everything else, why would you do it, right? And so I think you can prioritize a bunch of those things. So that should then sort of give companies, I think we've talked about this thing is that, outcome of all this would be a growth ops maturity model, which companies can then kind of benchmark themselves. And this is our view on how we think of the ops model, the maturity model.
Right.
And there could be things that are here that may not be that may be relevant to you, but may not be in the model. But this should give you sort of a lens for how to think about your desired end state. Like most of the time we've seen people either in the chaotic or defined state, right? Very few are heading towards optimized and agile, as he was speaking, right? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, and again, the key idea behind this maturity model is that you have to define something as being repeatable, right, before you can optimize it and then drive agility in that process, right? So it kind of describes the stages that you have to go through. If you have let's assume you have a holdout process. For those of you not familiar with what holdouts are, the time given to a rep moving off of an account to close the open deals that they have before the deals transition to a new person, right? And so if I'm working a territory and I'm getting reorged into a different territory, then do I get to close the deals that I was working on? How many deals do I get to close? How long do I have to close them? Right? That's the concept of holdout. And so take a concept like that and say, today, if I don't issue holdouts at all, and if I'm making ad hoc decisions at the field level where the manager says, okay, man, you can hold on to this one deal, but give the others to somebody else. And if arbitrarily you're making those decisions, you don't have a repeatable process. You don't have something that can be automated, right? So most organizations sort of start there when they're growing. And then you get to a state where now you have a defined process for how to issue holdouts, right? And you're saying, okay, mid-market gets this much, and SMB gets this much, and enterprise gets this much in terms of here's the policy. So what you start to do when you define the process is you start to establish policies. The first step in establishing a policy is you write it down and you send it to everybody and say, make sure you follow this, right? And more often than not, those documents never get read. So you, you have to at some point move to institutionalize that in your systems, because that becomes easier for people to follow. And so when you write a policy, you're sort of helping define the processes into something that's repeatable. When it's repeatable, you can look at, well, how fast or quick or agile or whatever angle do you want to look at that process and say, what does it take for it to be optimized, right? So then you would sort of think about, okay, how fast am I doing something? How quickly am I doing something in terms of, start to finish? How efficient is this? And so you can start to look at your operational motions and say, hey, when I need to go check the ramp and report on the ramp, it's a 6-week process, right? And that's too much time. We can't afford to take that much time, right? So you would analyze it from those angles to define what optimized means. Now, it varies by process. It varies by the area of topic you're looking at. But ultimately, what we're all driving towards is the holy grail of being agile. And what this means is, if I get a request in, I can process that and deliver that with the least amount of resource implications and quickly on time, so that they can make decisions out in the field, right? So that's the agility that you're driving towards, and the agility of the operational process, right? It takes so long to get a discounting process approved. The discounting process is ad hoc. What do we need to do to make sure that it's repeatable? Your split policies are ad hoc, right? How do we turn that into a policy so that it can be repeated and automated? So that's really the lens that we're looking at from the maturity model standpoint. It will take each capability and then say, okay, are my processes chaotic? Are they defined? Can they be optimized, and what is the angle that I'm going to look at to be optimized, and what does it take for this capability to be agile? Like, what does that mean? And you define that by the individual capabilities that we have on the big Monopoly board.
So there's one question that came in, which is essentially, how do you sell the lens of taking a capability lens approach internally to an organization, right? I think we built that process when we were at Salesforce. So it'll be good to sort of share how do you build a case around taking a capability lens on things that you need to do.
Yeah, I think as a team, you're always justifying the automation that you want, right? And it's important whether you have a pre-built software out there that can drive that agility for you, or it's custom coding that you have to do, bring in a bunch of consultants and build something. Whatever your approach is to automation, you are looking at, what is the total cost of ownership of the solution you're going to put in, right? And I think more often than not, we are very simply driven by, I got this problem, there's a product in the market that says it can fix it, I'm just going to go buy that product and use it. What you're not considering is the total cost of ownership, right? In terms of maintenance, in terms of its impact for you to be agile, which means that if I need to make a change in the system, what does it take? How much time, effort does it take to administer it, to manage it? Who's going to manage it? Who's going to maintain the data in these systems, right? So that total cost lens has to be applied. And to justify it, you can sort of look at how much time and effort and the opportunity cost of not delivering that capability on time is, right? And that becomes the way in which you can justify. What does it mean when a sales rep joins the organization and they don't have their territory for 2 months?
That's huge. Yeah, that's huge. I mean, that's, I think that's huge, because I've seen a lot of companies out there where, quarter starts, a rep comes in and they're still waiting for giving him quotas and his territories.
That's right. And so the opportunity cost of not getting that person off the ground is 45 days of selling, right? Yeah. And ultimately, you want to sort of say, how does this capability that I'm requesting to be automated, actually impact our selling efficiency, impact our top line number. And in most cases, you want to find that direct link between what you're doing and that top line number, right? Otherwise, I would question why you're automating it, because sometimes we could just automate for the sake of automating. It makes the process easy on the ops side, but it doesn't necessarily help the sales team achieve more efficiency, right? And that's also one key angle that I want to call out is, as ops teams, it's always very easy for us to say, let's optimize for our efficiency and not the effectiveness of the sales team, right? So if you optimize for your efficiency, what you would do is you would cut down all possible ways in which changes can happen. You would say, okay, here's the streamlined process. No, you're not allowed to make this change, Mr. Manager, in the field, because that adds more work for us, right? And so if you take the lens of optimizing the process or optimizing the thing for the sales organization, sorry, the ops organization, then invariably you end up impacting the agility of the sales organization to respond to field conditions, right? And so that, I think, is something as ops people we have to keep in mind. Automation shouldn't be about making ourselves more effective as an ops team. It should be about making the sales team more effective to deliver what they need to do, right? And that angle is always super important, because I've seen so many ops teams basically, say, hey, once a territory is given to you, you can't make any changes. It doesn't matter that you have bad data in there or whatever, but you can't make any changes to territory. Well, that's kind of a hard line to take, right? And so that flexibility in the field, you have to look at it as a competitive advantage to your team, right? And so that's an important thing to consider.
Yeah. So thank you. We are at time, but it's hopefully this was valuable conversation. I think love to get some feedback from folks, and I'll think we would love to get deeper into each section, like how do you think about quotas?
We talked about, each of those elements in the model can be a session.
Yeah, so we'll definitely do that. I think next week I have Raj from the Alexander Group coming on, and we'll be talking about what does it take to optimize a go-to-market strategy, knowing with all the current environment that's going on, right? And so how do you reset quotas? How do you think about that stuff? So that should be interesting as well.
Yeah,
and then we'll get into one of those meetings. Well, thank you, everybody. We will end the broadcast from here. And if there's any questions or feedback or topics that you need, please shoot them our way. Thank you, Praveen and Jamie.
Awesome. Thanks, Ramesh.
Thank you.